Don, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here, my friend. You wrote and published your first book, Going North, Tips and Techniques to Advance Yourself, by the age of 23. That's young. So how did you come to be writing books about self-development when most of us were still trying to figure out what we wanted to do with our lives?
Good question, Nick. Well, before I answer that, I just want to thank you for having me on your podcast, man, especially with you having a good start with staying consistent with your content, my man, definitely. As for your question, man, like 23, like funny enough, it actually came from just being a guinea pig because the thing is, when you read a lot of self-development books and you actually take action from them, you're basically in guinea pig mode, trying and experimenting on what actually worked. So it really came from me just reading great books by John Maxwell, Brian Tracy, and Joe Vitale, and so many other folks, and just applying them to my own life to where I was giving talks on them. And funny enough, I was at a conference where I actually was networking with people, and one lady who I was networking with, I actually handed her one of these reading lists I was handing out to people called the 100 Books for Dynamic Living. And my name wasn't on that list. And she was like, "Hey, where's your name on this list, buddy?" And it's like, "Oh, yeah, that's just me at the bottom. There's a contact, the Dom Brightmon 443. It's like, no, I'm not talking about you and your contact info. I'm talking about you as an author. And I'm like, oh, I'm like freaking 20, freaking two. I ain't got nothing to write about. Of course, I did at the time, but it's like I was going through the whole limiting beliefs thing. And she was like, okay, how about a year from today, Dom Brightmon, author? You can have your name in lights, you have a published book, you'll set yourself up for more success. You get to live out what you're preaching. And it's like, nah, I think I'm good. But funny enough, a couple of days later, was in a Toastmasters meeting giving a presentation, and a Q&A session was required for that presentation. And the thing was, a friend of mine who also attended those types of meetings to develop his communication skills, he heard about the conversation I had because I told him about it, and he saw this as a great opportunity to make that the first question, the Q&A of that talk, where that topic of book writing didn't even pop up at all. So I'm like, shoot, well, I don't look like a punk up here. The longest 3 seconds of silence ever that probably felt like 3 days happened. And I'm like, all right, a year from today, how could I freaking write this book? And it's going to be out there. 11 months passed by. It was probably November. So close to October, I was able to publish my first book, Going North, all because taking action from the stuff that I've read, applied it to my own life, and being around the right people who actually challenge me to be greater. Because we all need folks to really help us to really get some wind beneath our wings of our ideas, our goals, and our actions, and what we're looking to accomplish in life.
What I love about that is you had the mentor who inspired you and helped you shatter some of those limiting beliefs. How important do you think it is for people to find mentors in those early years to really give them that self-belief?
Good question. Mentors are very important. Mentors are a gift. Mentorship is even a book on steroids if you have the right mentor. Because the thing is, you can read a great book all day, nonfiction. Those are just basically words from folks who are either dead or alive who have a good story to share and information to share. But if you have a good mentor, especially who's in the field that you're looking to be in and really succeed in, then you have someone that can look at you from the outside and actually give you advice, and they can give you what they see, and they can give you the path forward. Because funny enough, it was having coffee one day with one of my mentors at the time, Dr. Ray Charles, not the musician. He sadly died before I could even, and plus I'm not seeking to be a musician anyway, especially that caliber of legend.
He would be
But
quite a mentor.
yeah, he really would be quite a mentor. I'll probably be picking up some business stuff. I'll probably be wearing sunglasses during this interview, but different Ray Charles, different RC. And he actually saw one of the books I was reading, and he asked me, "Hey, so what do you think about it?" Because that was something that he read as well. It was called The One Thing. And I was like, "Oh, that's a good freaking book. I like it. It's all about focusing on one major thing to help you succeed." And after a while of talking, he dropped the nugget in my life to switch my thinking, to shift my thinking of to stop being a consumer and to be a producer. Because the thing is, you can consume all day, but kind of like being a guinea pig with the self help personal development books. It's like you can read them all day for entertainment and get nothing out of them if you do nothing. But if
Mm.
you read them, get something out of them and do something with what you learned and actually apply it to your life, and then eventually create your own content with your own voice to inspire someone that author may not be able to reach the way you'll be able to reach them, then you'll be in a new level, if not business of immortality, if you put your content out there to reach that person that needs to be reached. Because there's folks out there who are listening to the show right now. There's someone listening to the show right now who may not have really thought of really their journey of becoming. They may have just like, oh, this looks kind of interesting. It's kind of a add and interrupt. Like, where's the extra I in this? Like, where's the guy I'm becoming here? Where is it? And it's like, oh, wait, this looks interesting. And they hear a certain phrase or a story that inspires them to keep going, because there's folks that you can reach that I may not reach. There's someone that you can reach that Nick may not be able to reach, all because you made that decision to stop consuming a bunch of content and filling your life to the point where you can have metaphorical information constipation, to the point where you're a producer putting out content, where
Mm.
you're putting out information transformation, where they're getting the information, they're being transformed by it.
Ultimately, we only get reflected back to us what we're putting out there. So if we want things, if we want value, if we want abundance reflected back to us, we have to produce. We can't just be consuming. How does someone go about finding a mentor?
You can find the information of folks out there who's doing what you want to do and reaching out to them. Heck, even authors of books, if they're still alive today, they'll be happy to have somebody reach out to them, especially if you read their book and they're excited about it. It's really all about just really tapping into what you want to do. Like my mentor, Dr. Ray, he came through Toastmasters International, and that's a nonprofit organization where folks get to have a sandbox of leadership in a way, because their tagline is where leaders are made. And to be a good leader, you have to communicate, hence public speaking.
Mm.
And he was my mentor. He was decades ahead of me, and he had a whole bunch of wisdom to share with me and help me to actually think even deeper than what I already was thinking. So, of course, Toastmasters, I mentioned that. I believe eventbrite.com, sometimes going to conferences, depending on what you're trying to learn, going to networking events. I know a lot of them are virtual nowadays. You can actually even reach out to probably certain people on social media and LinkedIn, especially. And if you're not a marketer, that's a bonus too, because I know a lot of folks are kind of mad that some of the online marketers are spamming LinkedIn a bit, even though I feel like it may have died down a bit. But like just reaching out to folks on social media and seeing if they offer mentoring as well. So there's so many options out there for both virtual and physical. It's just really knowing what you truly want to do and what you want to gain, and then taking the right steps and finding where you can find those people who want to emulate.
Yeah. And there's no harm in asking, right? What's the worst that can happen if you slide into someone's DMs and you just don't hear from them? I guess that's a good thing about social media. You have access to all of these authors and you can just fire off a few requests that way. You mentioned Toastmasters. Is this what we can credit for that silky, buttery, smooth voice?
I guess we can credit that for polishing myself up, because the thing was, I at the at the time I joined Toastmasters, I can't believe almost 10 years ago now, at the time of this recording, as a way to network and find a speaker for a public speaking seminar that I was doing for my community church. And the thing was, like, the serve the seminar went off without a hitch, and I learned a very important lesson about the way you structure things and way you advertise things, because public speaking is one of the number one fears, or one of the top fears known to man. And if you put audience participation on the outline, you're going to lose your crowd. I had about a good, I'd say 98 to 100 people in the room at the start of the seminar. When the speaker was done speaking, we took our break and it came time for the audience participation session. There was about 10 folks left. So that public speaking being one of the top fears known to man is real. But definitely Toastmasters, it helped me to really become more of an engaging speaker, as opposed to just one of those old school black church Baptist preachers who's up there on stage giving a fiery sermon, because that was really my background. I was raised in the church. That's where I learned public speaking. But that style doesn't always communicate in every venue you seek to reach out to.
And just to round out the point on mentorship, we're the average of the people we spend our time with. And We don't necessarily always need to be friends with that person or be in contact physically with the people that rub off on us. And in many ways, podcast hosts can be mentors as well. Do you think it's important for us to be really intentional about the content that we're choosing?
You're so right about that. And that's a very important point to bring up. And it's not just those that you hang around, it's really the content you absorb. One of the things folks have to mention or remember is that what you listen to is what you eventually become. Because if folks heard me growing up in my teenage and early 20s, like they really wouldn't hear much of a Southern accent. But when I listen to the Hodge twins a lot for laughs and giggles, and especially speakers like Grant Cardone and Zig Ziglar, you're going to get a bit of a Southern twang. And that's now part embodied within my speech now from those hours of listening to content from those folks and eventually becomes party. So it's not only those you're looking to learn from and eventually have your own version of success from emulating them. It's what you consume daily in your ears and through your eyes. So it's not just those that you're friends with, those that you have as mentors, but it's also being aware and being intentional, like you mentioned earlier with that content, because the thing was, I didn't realize at the time, but I was creating a version of speech and communication that wasn't even on my radar. I thought it was eventually a joke, but now it's just a part of my vernacular. So, yeah, it's really all about being intentional and choosing carefully who you should listen to and what you should absorb, because that eventually becomes a part of you.
In some ways, those online mentors, we can actually spend more time with them than our actual friends. If we're listening to a podcast with Tim Ferriss for 3 hours, that's going to be more time him in our ears than we'll get from our friends in a month. So yeah, it's super important to be really intentional about those online influences as well. Let's go back to you writing your first book. You said it took you a year. It's an extraordinary achievement for someone who's 23 years old. Did you find writing that book open some doors for you?
I mean, I was able to get on radio interviews, podcast interviews. Zach even got on a local news station and caught and threw a lot of people off by surprise. And was like, wait, this guy on freaking TV? Like, how'd you get on TV?
Do you think it's important for authors these days to have a podcast to really market their book? How important is it for the author to self-market?
It's definitely important. I actually had a author on my show, Jim Christina, who sadly passed away, I believe, 2022. I think it was the fall or the late winter. But he mentioned that, hey, if you are an author, make sure that if you truly are an author, you have to be into self promotion. I'm not as sure of the exact numbers these days, but over 100,000 books get published every week, if not every month, through Amazon. And the thing is, not a lot of those books don't sell. The average book may sell 250 to 300 copies in its lifetime, even big time authors with traditional publishers.
Wow.
And even with tours and everything, there's even some posts from social media last year of some big, I forgot some of the names, but they mentioned like, hey, don't be ashamed of this book signing where no one showed up, like myself, who's written so many books. Like no one only had two people show up to my book signing. I've been in this business for decades. So it's really all about finding ways to market yourself. So it's important, especially for those who've written nonfiction books, to start podcasts, because it's a way to really have another avenue to reach more readers. And the thing is, you get to keep the journey going with your readers.
I'd love to move on to the podcast shortly because I'd love to get some tips from you, because I'm in the early stages of my podcast. I'm 8 episodes in and I'm curious about some tips on how I can keep going. But just before we do move on, what drives you to continue writing books, Dom? I'm curious, and I have an inkling that it might tie back to your mantra, which is advancing others to advance yourself. Am I on the right path there?
Yeah, you're definitely on the right path there, because I'm really all about helping other folks, because a lot of folks have helped me and inspired me to live the life I'm living and to attain the things I'm going to be attaining in the future and what's going to manifest. Because the thing is, I've been blessed with this life, and I might as well use the breath I have and this life I've been given to really inspire and help others. So it's really about inspiring and helping others. And I got a goal to write a certain number of books before it's coffin time, because there's an activity I recommend folks to do if they don't get too spooked out by it. It's writing out your own obituary. And I picked this up from one of my personal development books. And one of the things I mentioned in that book, or should I say in that obituary, is that I was going to be a best-selling author of multiple books. So I got a I got a big goal
Mm.
ahead of me, and I want to keep writing. And the thing is, once you write one book and get that under your belt, you have that confidence of completion where it's like, all right, I can do this again and again. And the thing is, when you put a book out there, after you do a print run, even after you read it like 5, 10 different times and have a bunch of other people read it, there's still going to be typos and things like that. And when you're on a personal growth journey and you grow along and you're writing about self development, personal development, there's going to be some new things I'm going to learn that I'm going to want to share. And come 10th anniversary of Going North, there's got to be another edition of the book. So it's really all about helping others and continuing the growth journey. Because the thing is, when you put out content for folks to consume like that, you're basically in the business of immortality where you're leaving a piece of yourself long after you're gone.
Online businesses are such a fantastic way for people to create freedom in their lives. People listening to this might be interested in a side hustle of their own. How would you encourage one of those people to start a side hustle in creating content online? Where would you encourage them to start?
Good question. And first time I think someone's actually asked me about that because folks always focus on inspiration of podcasts and things like that, but definitely focus on when it comes to a side hustle. What do you enjoy doing? Like, is there a way that your hobby can really generate more income for you? And like with writing and podcasting and eventually leading into other avenues of affiliate marketing and things like that, it's really a great thing to do. So for those looking, just focus on one thing here, take action from that, and then just really keep on going. So it's all about setting aside the time to do it after you figure out why and what you want to do. Keep doing it, make sure you take action because you don't want to be in that fog of just learning endlessly and
Mm.
absorbing and consuming endlessly that you don't do anything at all.
Yeah. At some point, you've just got to take action. And I think it's important also to not focus on perfection as well. With my podcast, for example, there were a thousand other things I could have done before I started so that it was perfect. But eventually, you've just got to dive in and improve and reiterate as you go. Now, you've probably just touched on some of these, but in your podcast, Going North, you've interviewed some 700 authors. I'm curious about any common themes or lessons which have helped these authors steps towards elite performance.
Sure thing. Then one of the major things I've noticed that a lot of the authors do is that they reinvent themselves a lot, especially when I interview certain high performers who've been doing writing for a while and they also have a speaking business or they also have a coaching business or even they maybe even have a day job and they just do a lot of writing, especially sci-fi writing. Heck, even one guest in particular, Kat Hudson, who is a inspiration to me to this day because she is a peak performance writer and ghostwriter because her average is 10,000 words a day. And I was like, what the freaking hell? Like, that's the size
Wow.
of my freaking second book. Like 10,000 words. Shoot, you did that in a day? Like, God dang, I'm slacking. And the thing was, is because she was able to know her POP, or place of productivity. Like, she has a standing desk when she types out her content. And she always makes sure that she does some exercise too, because she also is a wife and a mother, so she's lucky enough to have a stay-at-home dad or husband to help out with keeping the baby calm and whatnot. And of course, them living together in the same house and just being able to crank out all of them words to a point where she could probably get a book done within a week for a client. And she herself has at least, my God, at least 50 plus books. So it's really all about continuously reinventing yourself and always knowing your place of productivity. Because when she
Mm.
started and she asked a couple of ghostwriters of, all right, so what's it like? Any words of wisdom? And they're going to be like, oh, yeah, you're eventually going to be able to crank out 10,000 words a day with these. She's like, man, y'all are full of it, until she actually realized, oh, I'm actually doing this myself. So being able to reinvent yourself, that's one of those commonalities, always growing and changing with time. And two, their place of productivity. They know when they work best. Like some work best at night,
Mm.
especially those with kids. Got to put them to bed. It's like, all right, let me put my head to work here and really crank out these words here, to some who do it early in the morning and really just focusing on their health and what helps them to be their best. So definitely being open to reinvention and always reinventing yourself, because you're going to evolve and change with time. And then finding your POP, your place of productivity, knowing what times you work best and how you work best. So that way you can put out your best work.
There's an element of experimenting and trying new things to really find that place of productivity. For me, it's definitely in the morning. And if I can get sitting down by 8 a.m., that's when my brain is most fired up, ready to work. But Dom, as someone who's written a bunch of books and interviewed over 700 people on your podcast, you strike me as someone who doesn't procrastinate and can dive into work and dive into action. Have I got that wrong? Do you procrastinate like the rest of us?
Oh yeah, procrastination. Like it funny enough, a past guest mentioned like, hey, writers will find any way to procrastinate. I can even some of the she even mentioned like, hey, anyone looking for a spouse, make sure you find a writer, because your house is gonna be extremely clean, because they're gonna do everything in their power sometimes to avoid
Before the
writing, looking at
writing.
that that blinking cursor. But
Yeah.
yeah, but the thing is, another thing to consider too is that all procrastination really isn't bad, because sometimes folks work best under pressure. Sometimes I'm like that myself, where it's like, oh yeah, warning, productivity under pressure. It's like, all right, I got to get these words in by a certain date if they're working with the traditional publisher. And some folks were like, all right, well, I procrastinated long enough to where the inspiration actually hit me, where it's like, oh, let me write this down. And another thing is that you have to also be able to think it when you think it as well. So keeping little notepads and pens is always a must for me in my car
Mm.
whenever I'm out and about. If I have a cell phone that may be dying or whatever, and I forget to like voice record it. So it's really all about realizing that, hey, we all have strengths and weaknesses, and that procrastination isn't all bad. I'm not saying this ain't a license to go out and do it with everything in your life. Don't take it that way. It's just, if you're a creative person, sometimes you may not be in the proper headspace
Mm.
for a certain project. Sometimes you may have to do another project where it puts you further ahead. Sometimes you have to make a book for fun and just self-publish it while you're waiting for another book to get finished through a traditional publisher. That's really what it's all about. Like, hey, folks still procrastinate.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you integrate journaling as part of your manifestation process or part of your daily ritual?
It used to be for a bit. I've fallen off of the wagon on that, just being honest and authentic. But one thing I do like to do instead of journaling from time to time is have a victory log. And I've gotten that from one of my podcast guests, where for 90 days you write down all your wins for the day. So for those listening to this podcast and finishing the episode, that can be a win. Waking up this morning, waking up today, that's definitely a win. Being able to have something to eat is a win. If it's your payday from work, that's definitely a win. Basically, creating that journal of proof to look back on, even as an additional confidence booster, can definitely help. So the journaling slacked off a bit with that, but definitely the victory log definitely picked that up.
Dom, you strike me as someone who garners such a high level of self-awareness. And thinking back to authoring your first book at 23, you obviously had a maturity above your age. Why do you think you do have that level of self-awareness that has really helped your online businesses?
That high level of self awareness really came from these five magical keys and a nice little acrostic called Mitch. So, the M, that is for mental awareness, being aware of your mind. And there's a reason why mindset is preached so much in the entrepreneur community, because, truth be told, like if your head is in the game, your body will definitely follow after a while. So, really keeping your head in the game and keeping focused. The next one also can tie in with mental awareness. It's also called influence awareness. Kind of similar to what was mentioned earlier in the conversation when I was listening to all those folks from the South, but a Southern twang to their voices that gave them a bit of an accent. that eventually prop his way onto me. You have to be careful of what you read, what you watch, what you listen to, because eventually that will eventually become a part of you, and especially the folks that are around you. So being aware of the things that are influencing you. Then there's the T, which is time awareness. And the reason why it's time awareness and not time management is because we all have the same amount of time, the 168 hours in a week. And it all depends on where your attention goes during that time. If you're lucky enough to get your 40 hours of those 168 hours dedicated to sleep, high five to you, gold medal for you, because a lot of folks don't get those proper 8 hours. There may be some with insomnia, some just may have bad habits that help them to not have good sleep. So it's really all about managing your attention, not managing your time, hence time awareness. And the C is for connection awareness. Do you have your metaphorical Wi Fi signal open for other people to connect to your network? And that is a big one for me because that's helped me to advance a lot further in life because the more hands you shake, the more money you make. And the thing is, if you meet a lot of wonderful people who can give you their shortcuts from their long road, you'll definitely get to advance a lot quicker. And the thumb to put it all together, the wonderful H is habit awareness. Your habits determine your future because one of the major things, and I mentioned this in the intro of my second book, Stay the Course, is the fact that one of the habits that fell off by the wayside for me in the years of 2015 to 2018 was basically a lack of sleep because I was doing so much full time day job. My father had dementia at the time, so being a part time caregiver for him, along with my older brother and my mom, and then also being in a volunteer leadership position, which felt like a full time job, where I was dedicating at least probably a good 10 to 20 hours a week with that, where I was running ragged if I was lucky enough to even get a good 8 hours of sleep. I was getting 0 to 2 hours of sleep a night. And that led to me gaining a whole bunch of weight. Because the thing is, when you don't get that sleep, your body will negatively react. You'll be short with people. You'll not only be short with people, you'll most likely be irritable. And then if you substitute a bunch of caffeine in there, then you'll be jittery all the time and then eventually gain a bunch of weight because you didn't give your body that wonderful reset button of really allowing your body to recover, especially if you
Yeah.
do workouts to be able to get those gains and things like that. So those five major keys, definitely the mental awareness, the influence awareness, time awareness, connection awareness, and habit awareness. Like being aware of those five major keys will help you to have that high level of self awareness and that elite performance level of productivity that you definitely desire.
Yeah, back to sleep. The well rested version of myself and the sleep deprived version of myself are two completely different people. And it's funny when we're when we're sleep deprived, we have such less self control when it comes to eating or habits. And that's why often when people are hungover or sleep deprived, it's so much easier to dive into junk food or whatever the vice may be because that self control in our brain is less effective. Now, you mentioned your dad and how you were a carer for your dad. I lost my dad in 2019, and I think that whole process for me really cultivated a whole new level of self awareness. And I'm curious if you had a similar experience.
Yeah, definitely. Because my dad himself, he passed away in 2017. And that actually led to the second book having a thesis of self awareness being the major key of elite performance because I thought I was self aware, and that's usually the first mistake of those thinking they're self aware. It's like, oh, yeah, I got a high level of self awareness. It's like, no, I didn't. Because the thing was, after he passed away and the funeral was over, I thought I would be really having all this extra time and energy to really be my best at work and be able to really get back to the go getter me full time again. And truth be told, it wasn't
Mm.
because my boss at the time called me in for a meeting about a good, I'd say it was 3, 4 months after he passed. It was March 2017. He passed, and it was around July I had that meeting. So yeah, it was that time where boss had to check up in on me, be like, "Sure, you all right? Because you've been screwing up in these certain areas, my buddy." And it's like, oh, wow. I thought I was good at this whole self awareness thing. I guess I'm not anymore, or at least not as good as I thought I was. And I had to
Yeah.
go back to the drawing board and go deeper and realize, okay, this is where I need to change things. This is where I need to adjust things because the thing was like I had a modicum of success, whereas like, all right, what got me to that level is not going to get me to that next level.
Mm.
And it required a new level of diving deep into the habits and really discovering new levels of that self-awareness and emotional intelligence to the point where it's like, all right, I can finally realize a new level. But it's like, hey, I'm still growing and getting better with time. So let me make sure I keep up with that. So yeah, it was a new level, but not the one I was expecting. Life will throw you curveballs and you will have a bingo card in your mind of how your life is going to go year by year, month by month, week by week. But you're going to miss that left turn at Albuquerque every now and then, and you think you've reached a fork in the road, but it's really a spoon.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious if you had any tools or strategies that really helped you get through that period of grieving and unleash and accept that next level. For me, dealing with a death in the family, it really forced me to face my emotions and accept them and deal with them. And for me, it was really important to allow myself to cry and release the pressure and that build up and really feel the grief when it came up in the years that dad was sick. I even had a song that I'd listen to which brought up emotion every time, and listening to that song to release the emotion became a bit of a ritual. But I'm curious if you had any advice for people listening who might be going through some grieving or dealing with the loss of a loved one, if you had any tools that might help them get through that period.
Sure thing, my man. And you mentioned one of them is definitely allowing yourself that time and space to grieve. Because the thing was, when my dad first passed away, there was a 2 week window from that to his funeral because he was a veteran in the United States Army. And those graves, you have to do things a certain way and you have to wait a certain time. And I was full of new energy those 2 weeks unexpectedly because I had to run and go and prepare all these things. And the home was basically a call center. And after the funeral happened, I had a playlist of some of his favorite music, some of it gospel, some R&B, some blues, and listening to that music. And that also brought back some memories too. And heck, even not only that, but also making sure you give yourself that time to grieve and really look back and think of those lessons that you've learned from your loved one, especially a close one like a parent or heck, even a sibling, depending on who you're grieving too. Just focus on those good times, what you learn from them. Because one of the things I always go back to is that my dad had a great work ethic because he was in his early 80s still helping out his church with their food bank with lifting heavy boxes like and he wasn't the muscular 82nd Airborne Division paratrooper that had a couple combat jumps and wars and conflicts overseas like he was back then,
Yeah.
and he was still lifting heavy boxes and he was lacking energy and lethargic. And I was like, Dad, like, why are you still doing this? Like, you're like in your 80s now. And he mentioned that, hey, like, God's given me this life to live. And the least I can do is use my life to help out other people and do something good with it. And just that example alone always sticks with me. And I tend to share it a lot on podcasts, interviews, and talks because the thing is, a good work ethic is going to be required if you want to really get something out of life. Yes, there's other ingredients, tools, tips, and techniques involved depending on what field it is. But at the end of the day, you still gotta get up, you gotta move, you gotta do the work regardless of the level. So just focusing on those wonderful lessons definitely helps you with those times of just living your life for them and realize depending on where you are spiritually, they'll be with you. Some you can even see it as guardian angel status because they're are times where it's like, oh, here's a sign from heaven. Like, oh,
Mm,
here's a wonderful change on the ground. You always would leave change on the ground sometimes and just hear certain songs and things like that and signs. So just being open to the fact that, hey, they may be gone, but I still have their lessons and I still live those memories.
that's beautiful, and they'll always live on. Dom, thank you so much for generously sharing your value today. One question I ask everybody before they leave, and I think this ties nicely back to what we were speaking about, how you like to think about where you'll be in 5 years to take action in the present. My question for you, sir, is who is the person you're becoming? I'd love to learn the version of Dom that you're aspiring to step into every day and who you might be in 5 years down the track.
The person Don Brightman is going to be in 5 years is going to be a millionaire, a father, and a well respected man in his community who is known for helping others and being generous with others, and is really all about being known as the guy who can really help others, and he doesn't mind sharing time, talent, or treasure with others. So that's definitely the guy I definitely want to be. So more books, bigger business, but at the end of the day, just a guy who's happy where he is and happy to help out his fellow human.
Well, you're certainly on track, sir. And finally, where can the Becoming Village find you? What piece of content should they read first, or how can they seek out some coaching or some guidance?
Sure thing. The good news is it's all in one place, dombrightman.com. That is dombrightman.com. I'm on social medias at Dom Brightman, like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or X, as it's called now. It's no longer a bird, it's just a random X. I guess Elon loves X's, maybe ex girlfriends too, but that ain't me. But yeah, dombrightman.com is everything dumb. You can find the podcast there and everything.
And the podcast is Going North.
Yes, indeed. Go north, my friends.
Go North, friends. Thank you, Dom. Great to connect. And let's do it again soon.
Woohoo! Thanks again, Nick.